You are now listening to The Unwavering, the movement dedicated to educating and empowering the brave men and women who have or are still serving our great nation. What's up, everyone? This is Kevin, an 8-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps, with another episode of The Unwavering. Today, we are very fortunate and we have an amazing guest who's going to talk to us about women who have served in the military, the things that they go through, and not just being a military member, but being a service member, being a mother. So all these different roles that they're simultaneously tackling. We're super excited to have her. But before we get to introducing her to all of you, a huge shout out to all the service members, everyone who's on active duty, all the reservists, the veterans, and the family members who choose to support them and stick through deployments and things like that. We can't do it without you guys, so thank you so much for that. I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to Amanda and let her introduce herself.
So I served in the Air Force for 6 years as a civil engineer. I deployed with the Army to Afghanistan on a provincial reconstruction team, and my husband is still currently serving in the military, and we were both serving, and when we had kids, we were like, one of us needs to get out. So I decided to leave the military and be a stay-at-home mom, and that was kind of a little stressful to leave the military and to stay at home, and I felt like I needed to be doing something. So I started a blog called Airman to Mom, and from that I started a podcast this year called Women of the Military, where I interview women and share their stories.
I'm just super excited to be here, to be able to have this time to talk to you, because one of the things that I feel is important is giving back to our community, and I'm sure you feel the same way. It's just so important for us to never forget where we came from, and I think it's absolutely incredible that you are empowering women and giving them a voice. So I just want to say it's super inspirational to see your story, to see the amazing things that you're doing, and to see the feedback that these women are posting. I've gone through some of the comments and stuff and seen that you've made a real impact on their lives. So first and foremost, big thank you for continuing to dedicate your time. Yes, you're not currently on active duty, but in my eyes, you are still serving in that same role. You're still empowering others. You're still being a leader for our community. So big thank you to you.
Thank you. Serving, I think, is something that the military, I don't know if we're born with it or if the military ingrains it into us, but I feel like in this past year, I've really found my voice and my passion. To be able to give back has been really a cool thing.
My take is we kind of have it in us already, but definitely the military completely amplifies it. I was one of those people that when I was in, I was like, I'm not going to get out, and I'm not going to be that person that is super Marine Corps and wears the t-shirt, or I just didn't think that was going to happen to me. But when I left, there was a huge void of no longer being surrounded by my family. I'm sure you can attest to that 100%. But going into today's topic, I really want to share the passion that I've heard from your podcast. So guys, if you are listening, please follow Amanda's blog, check out her podcast. We'll leave you guys with some more information about how to contact her and how to reach out later during this episode. But if you're a service member, a family member, there's so many unique stories that she has been sharing that it really makes you look at your own family and look at how to make things better or how to get through those tough times. So definitely give her a shout if you guys get a chance. But your time when you were in the military, when you served, what was the climate at that time? Being a woman in the armed forces, what was that like?
I didn't have any negative experiences. I never faced sexual trauma of any kind, and I was always given respect by my peers. There were some instances where women are sometimes called negative words just because you're trying to state sometime and your voice is a little high-pitched, then you come off as whiny and complaining. And so that was like my biggest negative deterrence. And actually, when I got tasked with my deployment to Afghanistan, one of the lieutenants that was at the base with me, even though he had hurt his leg, he wanted to take my place and not have me go on that deployment because it was going off base and it was a little crazy. And my commander gave me the choice, the opportunity to decide if I wanted to go or if I wanted to let him go in my place. And I think he was proud of the fact that I said, no, I was tasked and he's injured, so I think I should be the one to go. So I feel like I had good leaders who trusted me and pushed me, and overall I had a good experience.
That's awesome. I'm super happy to hear you say that. I'm definitely the same way. I think I've had some pretty positive experiences during my time in. I know that's not the case for everyone, though. I know, unfortunately, there are things that happen. People get mistreated. There's abuses of power. There's definitely things that go on that can completely ruin someone's perspective of their time in the military. These are stories that maybe some people don't want to talk about, but I definitely want to bring them to light. So earlier I was saying thank you to the family members. Not only were you an armed service member, but you were also a mother, a wife. What was that like, balancing so many different roles, trying to be the head of the household? Maybe your husband was deployed and you're still on active duty. You're still watching the kids. You're still doing all these extra things. What is that like?
So my husband would travel a lot for his job, and every time we would have to PCS, which is permanent change of station, essentially move. We never moved at the same time because either I was deployed or he was in training or whatever was going on. So when I got pregnant with my son, it was the hard but easy choice for me to get out. So I was actually only on active duty with my son for about 2 months, just doing all the final paperwork to get out of the military, because I used to say that life was really complicated when it was just me and my husband, but we could figure it out. But when you added kids to the mix, it just made everything way more complicated. Just like you said, deployments, TDYs, all the things that go along, and then like not moving together at the same time. It just felt overwhelmingly complicated. So we decided it made more sense for one of us to get out and one of us to stay in.
So for you guys, they don't try and move you together as a couple, or was it because you guys had completely different jobs that made it more difficult?
It was a little bit of both. My husband commissioned in 2006, and then I graduated college and commissioned in 2007. So that was the first reason that we were separated, because he went active duty a year before I did. And then the second time, we had both applied to go to a school, and I didn't get into school. I went to Afghanistan, and he ended up getting into the school, and so he went to that training. So in reality, eventually probably we would have lined up, but his job is very specific to what he does, and there's only like 9 bases he could go to, and then I could only go to like 3 or 4 of those bases. So it made it really complicated to try and like figure out which base was going to work for our career, especially as we progressed in our career and there were less jobs. And it was just such a nightmare to try and figure out all the pieces. And it looked like at 15 years, eventually one of us would be stationed in one place and one would be stationed in another. And we didn't want to go through all the different sacrifices to get to that point and then one of us get out.
Do you think that you being a fellow service member made that easier, though? Like, you understood the lifestyle?
It makes it easier because, like, I know the why, but it doesn't change the fact that I still get pissed off at the military. And, like, I have those, like, frustrating moments. I know why he's working, and I know, like, what's the reason behind it and, like, how the military works, but that doesn't mean that it's like, oh, I'm just happy about the fact that he's going on another trip or he's working lots of hours. The emotions of, like, how hard it is doesn't change the fact that it's hard.
You're right. I mean, you can't really control your emotions, and it's
Right.
still, you're losing your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, I don't know, maybe you guys had an event planned or birthdays or holidays. So it still sucks to lose that person.
Yeah, and it's really hard, especially like with some of the opportunities I've gotten in this past year. I got to be on Fox Business, and he almost had a TDY that he couldn't move because it was the mission. And luckily it got postponed a week, but I was like trying to figure out who's going to watch my kids at like 5 a.m. so I could go to the interview because there's nothing he could do. And I was like, change it. But I knew, it's the mission. You can't change it. So.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you for being able to adapt. And I'm very glad that it worked out and you were able to get on there and talk to some people and spread the word. That's awesome. So obviously you being a spouse and a service member had a tremendous impact on the reason why you started your blog and the podcast. What is it when you talk to these other women who are currently serving, or maybe even spouses, what brings you guys together? What are the common issues that you guys struggle with?
I think it kind of depends, like if it's veteran, like women veterans or like military spouses. I'm actively involved in both groups, and I'm friends with a lot of like military spouses who don't have prior service. And so they usually like to talk to me about what it was like to be in and try and understand what it's like to be in the service, because for some reason I can explain things, or maybe I'm just willing to talk about things that their husbands don't talk about. So when I share my story, it kind of gives them a peek into what their husbands are thinking, or they can at least relate a little bit better to what their husbands are going through. Someone was talking at a thing I went to about how if two veterans are in a room, then they can talk forever, which is true. And then she said if you put two women veterans and it like amplifies it. And I think the same thing can be said for like male veterans, or even like male veterans who are the same MOSs. The more commonalities that you have, like the more stuff you can talk about. It's surprising how similar male and female veterans are, but when you put two women together who served, it's like this instant friendship, and it's really cool to experience.
Yeah, definitely. I notice that when I, walk around, if I wear like a Marine Corps shirt or if I run into a corpsman, it's an instant like, hey, what's up, devil? And other people are like, did he just call that guy a devil? Like, what does that mean? That's offensive. And it's like, oh, sorry. We're from the same community. It kind of goes hand in hand. But your podcast, the women that talk to you, what is it that you're doing differently that's helping them?
Well, my screening process is woman, veteran, and that's it. So it's not that I'm like excluding people. I think every person who served in the military, male or female, has a story to tell. I think people in general have a story to tell. And I'm just trying to narrow in on like women veterans, because I don't have time to talk to everyone, and I don't even have time to talk to all the women. So that's why I like narrowed in my focus on talking to them. To start it, I say, is there anything unique from their experience? And then based on their answer, I can focus on what the questions are. But I always start with, why did you join the military? And then I usually end with, what would you tell young women who are looking to join the military? The story kind of just unravels in the middle.
That's incredible. I'm sure you've probably been blown away by some of the stories that you've heard. I mean, I was listening to some and I'm like, holy crap, I've never thought about it. And that's why I like listening to it, because it gives me a different perspective. Like I said, I can only see things from, my point of view, or from being a male in the military, but you guys make up a pretty large force when it comes to the military. I have some truly influential women in my life that I served with, whether they were active duty, whether they were spouses. You guys bring so much to the table, and I don't think enough people are out there sharing your voices and sharing your stories. Is there a certain topic that you think is important that is kind of tough to talk about? Something that's near and dear to your heart?
I think for me, I had PTSD after deploying to Afghanistan, and I really struggled with anger. And so talking about like the mental health side of coming home from a deployment, and the fact that I've been able to go to counseling and I've been able to get help. I never thought I could be a person who didn't get angry and act crazy about the dumbest things. And I've gone through this healing process and this healing journey, and I'm not the same person I was 4 years ago. And it's been so cool to talk to other women and to hear their stories and not feel so alone. And so I feel like the podcast has kind of replaced my therapy sessions, and now that's my new therapy, because I get to talk to other people and I don't feel so lonely.
It's funny that you say that. I told someone that I was talking to, I said, honestly, the podcast selfishly gives me something in return. Like, it's a way for me to be surrounded by people that I love. And this is a therapy session. I don't know how else to explain it, but you can talk through things. Your story, you talking to other women, you guys are growing yourselves, but your message is helping so many people, whether you know it or not. So it's cool that it's helping both parties. Moving to going from active duty to a civilian, what struggles do you guys go through that is unique when you're coming into the civilian workforce? Like, do they see you as too aggressive or too dominant? What are some of the struggles you guys face?
I went from being a stay-at-home mom to being a business owner, and so I didn't have to deal with that, but I actually was editing a podcast episode this morning about my friend who went into the workforce, and she was very abrasive, and she talked about how she had to like actually talk to people and not just tell them like do this. And I thought it was funny because I was the same way. I would be like, I need this, and they'd be like, hello, and I'm like, oh, hi, how are you? Like, you like kind of forget that because the military is all about like get this done. And so in the civilian world, it doesn't work that way. I've even caught myself having to be like doing the interpersonal relationship and not just diving into like what the job is and what you have to get done. But for women, I think the hardest part for women is that they talk about women being invisible veterans. And I know that male veterans don't like stand out. They just look like guys. But I've had at multiple times where people will thank either my husband or the men standing behind me and pretend like I didn't raise my hand. And a lot of women get frustrated with this, and so they don't even identify because they don't want to deal with that. But that does happen regularly, and it's really weird because people will just ignore the fact that you've served and they thank other people when you're standing right there.
That's kind of BS if you ask me, because it definitely frustrates me when I see that people have sacrificed and they have given up certain things to help others. And it's not that we need acknowledgement. Like, I don't need you to tell me thank you. I don't want you to tell me, but I do want you to tell the person to the left or right of me. You know what I mean? It just drives me insane. So hearing that you guys feel like maybe you don't belong or you're not acknowledged is unfortunate. And I think having this opportunity to talk to you, hopefully some people listening realize that. But what do you think we do to fix that? Like, what do we do as a community? Because you're a service member. You did your part just like I did. So what do we do to help you and vice versa?
For me, I initially ran away from the veteran community because I felt like I wasn't going to be included. I had only thought of the stereotype of what people think of the VFW. It's a lot of older men. It didn't sound like fun, and it didn't sound like something that I wanted to be a part of because I kind of just dove headfirst into my new role, which was being a mom and being a military spouse. So my blog was really focused about being a mom and a military spouse and not so much on the veteran piece. And I really tried to run away from talking about that, but people kept being more interested in my veteran piece and my past stories. So that kind of drew me back to where I am today. But I think we have to be open to not think about the stereotypes and actually get involved in places like the American Legion and the VFW. And if they're not welcoming, not to be offset by that, but to go and find a different one or a different organization. I didn't know for a long time that there were a bunch of women-focused veteran organizations, and when I've gotten involved in those, I realized that the community that I've been looking for is still there. I talk to other women, and they're involved in the American Legion, and I'm like, oh, maybe I could be welcome there. And the more I talk to male veterans like yourself who are super excited about what I'm doing, which was something I didn't really expect that male veterans would be excited about it. And so it's just kind of a little bit of both. You guys listening to our stories means more than I think you know, but us also being willing to go back into the military community because it's kind of a hard place to be as a woman.
Oh, I'm sure. I've seen both the good and the bad of being a certain sex in the military, being completely honest. But that's why I asked this question. It's one thing for us to say we have a problem, but how do we address it? How do we fix it? And how do we let other people know that you're an equal? Speaking to you, I don't think you're anything less than me. I think we're equals. I've found that you are extremely passionate about the community and giving back and are doing some of the exact same things, actually more, let's be honest, much more than I'm doing for our community. So in my eyes, why should you be treated differently? Why should you not be proud to raise your hand and say, I'm a vet as well? It's kind of disheartening, but that's why I'm glad that we're having this conversation. So talking about some of those groups, you mentioned the VFW, the American Legion. Are there other groups that for the women listening, you recommend them getting involved in, whether it's a Facebook group, whether it's LinkedIn? Are there things where they can go and connect to individuals like you?
So I really like Service Women Action Network. They do a lot of stuff on Capitol Hill, but they're working to connect women and to elevate things that women have been struggling with, and they're making actual changes on Capitol Hill and making things into law. And I met them at the Vetties, which is kind of like an Oscars, but for veterans, and they ended up winning in the women category, and during their speech they had every female veteran in the room stand up, because a lot of the guys at the Vettys had their ribbons on their jackets, and they were talking about how women are invisible and that you might not know that the person sitting next to you is a veteran because she's in a formal dress and she doesn't look like a veteran. And then the whole room, when we all stood up, applauded us, and I started crying. It was just kind of like a really cool moment to realize, like, I have all these brothers who care about me, and I kind of felt like I was forgotten. And in that moment, I realized that the military community was still there and that they were supporting me. So that's why I'm very passionate about SWAN, Service Women Action Network. And then I went to a conference last month with Women Veteran Interactive, and they're doing a lot of work to connect women veterans together and make changes in the communities that they're in. And there's a vetpreneur Facebook group that's men and women, and it's a great safe place to ask questions about being an entrepreneur and looking for resources as veterans, and I really like that one. And then I also think that the Military Influencer Conference, which is happening in San Antonio next year, I went to the one when it was in Florida, and then it was in DC this year. It's kind of like a party because all these veterans are hanging out together, and you like network on LinkedIn and Facebook, and then you get to meet in person. And it was kind of weird this last year because people kept coming up to me and they were like, "You're Amanda Huffman." And I'm like, "Yep." And they were like all excited. So it was kind of a weird experience. People knew who I was and they were excited to meet me, and they were excited about what I was doing. So they have a Facebook group too. I think it's called Military Entrepreneur.
That was an incredible list. I've always been one of those people to say, hey, join a group, whether it's specific to your MOS, as you said earlier, your military occupational specialty, or your job. For myself, I joined the Marine Corps Aviation Association. So they've got various galas and different events. And you're right, it's networking, it's professional, but at the same time, you're surrounded by people who understand you, who've been through the same struggles, who have funny stories that only you guys will laugh at. You know, you tell like a military joke to civilians, they're like, "Is there something wrong with you?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot my audience for a second."
Yeah.
But yeah, joining these different groups and just giving back, sharing stories, you don't really realize the impact you have on people. Like you said, you started going to these events and people were like, "Oh my God, it's Amanda." And you're like, "What? I'm like a normal person. Like, what? I'm not a, I'm not a celebrity." But that's one of those things. You don't realize the amount of impact that you can have on your community. Obviously, you continue to sacrifice for them. So I'm glad that they are acknowledging you, and hearing that, they had all of you stand up and applaud you is really cool.
Yeah.
And it's cool to know that at least for that moment, you felt like an equal, you felt respected, and you felt like this is exactly what I signed up for, which is brotherhood and a family. And I think we should all be a part of that. So that's awesome getting to hear that from you. So if you were talking to people outside of the military community, what do you think other people think about us, specifically women from the military? What do they think about you if they're a civilian?
They think that we're nurses and secretaries, and that we just barely got to start fighting in combat. And I feel like that's like my big thing, is that in 2016, women were finally allowed to be in all jobs in the military. And they're acting like, oh, the military like finally figured out that they should let women try this. And it's like, no, women proved that they could do it. I deployed in 2010 and I have a combat action badge. So that shows that I was in combat before I was technically allowed to be there, but that's what we were doing. I think people don't understand the role that women have played, not only the Iraq and the Afghanistan war, but all the wars that have happened. I don't know what they think, that we just haven't really done anything. Not that nurses and secretaries aren't important, because they are, but there's so much more to what women have done and what they've been doing for their country.
Definitely. Pilots, people out on the front lines. Another friend of mine, Amanda, has a Purple Heart. If you look at her record, it's impressive. She doesn't ever talk about it really, like unless she knows you or you ask her, but
Right.
definitely a well-decorated Marine, and you wouldn't know it unless you knew a little bit about her, but you're right. There have been women in combat roles, in combat scenarios, out on the front line, whether it's a nurse, whether it's a pilot, whether it's a quick reaction force.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to utilize this podcast to bridge the gap between us and society. I think there's a lot of things that people don't know about us, and we need to educate them on what we're really like. I don't cuss every other word. You know, there's so many different ideas that people have about us. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but I want them to hear it from us. At least give us the opportunity to have our voices heard and say, no, this is who I actually am. Obviously,
Right.
That's a perfect world scenario, but other women who have been talking to you, what have you helped them with the most, do you think? Or what have they told you?
I think a lot of women don't talk about their experiences. Like you said, your friend, no one knows because she doesn't talk about it. Just because it's kind of like it doesn't come up at play dates about like, oh, I was in the military. And then if it does, they're like, oh, that's nice. And then they don't ask you any questions. And I'm really nosy. And so I ask all the questions and I ask the hard questions and I try and get the whole story out. And so I think that's where most people are like, oh, okay, you served, that's nice. And I'm like, okay, I want to know all these things and I want to know about like your experience. And I'm not afraid to talk about things that are hard, like PTSD. And I've had 2 people who had military sexual trauma. One was raped and one was assaulted. And then I have one coming up next season. And actually that one was so powerful that I ended up crying because just her story was so powerful. And so I think just giving people a place where they can share their experience and what they've gone through. Just the stories of women are so remarkable and people don't know what we're doing.
Earlier, you said that you didn't think you were going to have as much of an impact on the male veterans or the male service members. What has that been like, and has that helped you continue to push? What kind of comments do fellow service members who are men give you?
So many of them tell me they're so excited that I'm doing this, and I'm like, okay. Like, I was always like surprised. And then I went to Podcast Movement this past summer, and I got to be on a panel about purpose-driven podcasting. And one of the people who showed up in the room was a male veteran that I kind of knew. We had interacted in a few different groups, but I didn't really know him that well. And then he showed up to listen to me speak on the panel and was like so excited for me. And it was kind of a light bulb moment of realizing these guys aren't just saying like we're excited, but they like actually are excited. He and I ended up going to lunch the next day, and we had the craziest conversation just talking about our experiences and about what it was like to podcast and to leave the military and to have the military and why we were passionate about what we were doing. And it was so crazy because we were like speaking the same language, and it was just a realization that I'm not as far away from the male veterans as I thought I was. I felt like because I'm a woman, I'm really different, but in reality, I'm really close to the same. And that's why I started coming back to the veteran community, because I realized that it's a place that I not only am welcome at, but I need to be there.
I'm glad that you've been experiencing those things and seeing that we're all a part of this. Yes,
Yeah.
There's certain things that you go through. There's certain things that I go through. But as these people have been telling you, you're bringing something greater to this community. And the way I look at it is, okay, maybe you're not helping me directly, right? Like maybe I didn't go through a sexual assault or something like that, but you're helping a Marine who I absolutely love and admire who went through that. Or maybe you're helping, a spouse, a sister, someone who is near and dear to us. So it's definitely really cool to see you in this space, seeing the effect that you're having, and again, on more than just women. So guys, if you are listening to this, male, female, civilian, military, it doesn't matter. Please check out her show, see the amazing things that she's doing, and maybe it doesn't help you directly, but maybe it helps someone else. So it's all about spreading the word and tackling those subjects that no one else wants to talk about. That being said, I kind of want to open up the floor to you to share with us how to get in contact with you, if there's anything exciting coming up that you want people to know.
So my blog is airmantomom.com, and the podcast is called Women of the Military, and I actually also wrote a book called Women of the Military, which is on Amazon, and it's 28 stories of military women, and they're mainly all not on the podcast because a lot of those women are anonymous, so it was a safe place for them to share their story where they didn't have to have their name attached to it. You can email me at airmantomom@gmail.com if you're interested on being on the show. There's also a link on the podcast landing page, which is at airmantomom.com/podcast, where you can sign up to be a guest on the podcast. And I will tell you that I have recorded episodes to get me through the summer, so I'm taking a break from recording right now because I had so many women sign up and they all filled up my calendar before I could close it down. So the last 2 months I've been recording a lot and it's been a little stressful, but we survived. And so if you want to be on the podcast, just know that when I send an email out and show you my openings, they'll probably fill up really quickly because there's just women excited to share their stories. And a few of those stories I already talked about, the one where she made me cry, and that one was really good. And then I also interviewed a retired 2-star, and so I'm excited about her story. There's a bunch of stories. There's so many stories. If you haven't listened to the podcast, I did get the chance to interview the former Secretary of the Air Force, Deborah James. She actually didn't serve in the military, but she was the Secretary of the Air Force, so it kind of made sense. So it was kind of interesting to hear her perspective being a civilian and then to be in charge of the Air Force. So those are some of the cool things that I've got to do.
Guys, again, we will definitely put all of her information out there so you guys can contact her. But if you guys have a story to tell, this is your opportunity to help others. I know sometimes we talk about stories that are extremely sensitive, but your stories have the power to help people push past the negativity and realize that they're normal. Again, I honestly cannot thank you enough for this opportunity. I know you're on the East Coast staying up extremely late for this. You had to put the kids to sleep. So thank you so much. I just want to leave you with one last opportunity to give a piece of advice to the listeners out there, whether it's women specific, whether it's military specific.
So one of the coolest things that I get to do is that lots of young ladies who are looking to join the military will send me either messages on Instagram or LinkedIn, and they're looking for advice or just guidance. They're either looking for a specific branch or career field. So as a veteran, one of the coolest things that I've got to do is mentor someone who's behind me. I'm mentoring a captain who's about to get out of the Air Force in the next year. And then I also mentored an airman who joined the Air Force and is at tech school right now. So I have these two young ladies who I get to, because I'm a little bit farther ahead than them, give back to them and help them and tell them, be prepared for this. This is what's coming when you leave the military, or this is what's coming. And the mentorship relationship that I've been able to form with them has been the coolest thing that I get to do. So if you know someone who's either in the military still and you're out, try and work to mentor them so that you can help them, because giving back is going to fill you up and help you find that purpose that you might have lost when you left the military.
That's what it's all about, giving back to others. Again, huge thank you to you, Amanda. Thank you so much for coming on board, sharing your story, some of the insight, and inspiring others, both men and women, to realize that we're in this together and we need to continue to empower each other.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to The Unwavering. Please rate and comment on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star and a great comment, and we may just read it on a future episode. Also, follow us on social platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Be sure to check back with us next week.